What if the thumbnails you are copying from your niche actually hurt your click-through rates? What if there are 8 things that you can add to your thumbnail that creates an open loop in your viewers' brains, making them psychologically unable to scroll past your thumbnail? And what if the difference between a 3% and a 21% click-through rate comes down to just changing one thing in your thumbnail? Sit tight, grab some popcorn, because this video is value packed. I mean, after uploading over 400 long form videos and designing over 1,000 thumbnails myself, we will start off with by far the most common thumbnail mistake that I see, which is not using a proven thumbnail format. I mean, most YouTubers copy their thumbnails from channels from their same niche, while smart YouTubers actually steal thumbnail formats from outside their niche. I mean, take a look at all of these outlier examples. Here are 6 thumbnail formats that I love. The first one is a tier list ranking. I mean, the images speak for themselves. The next one is a quote. And a personal note here, what I've noticed is the bigger the text that you can have on your thumbnail, the better. So try to remove all the fluff, the details. For example, on the Ali Abdaal version, you see the like counts. I mean, that's not necessary. People don't see that on their phone. And they definitely don't care. Which brings me to the reaction style video, where it is very important that you show a peak emotion in someone's face. Whether it's crying, laughing very extremely, or being shocked, which usually works quite well, the shock phase. On the opposite of that, we have the screen recording thumbnail format. Especially in the education niche, thumbnails like these crush it. Another thumbnail format which is crushing it in the education niche is the before and after one. But it's also much more widely applicable outside of basically in any niche you can apply these formats. However, this one is more difficult because it's the mid-action shot thumbnail format. Very difficult in most situations, but if you do it right, especially like the MrBeast one, it's absolutely insane when you look at the click-through rates. I'll comment the word guide below and you will get my full PDF with more formats like these. Which brings me to the 9 viral thumbnail elements. Because within all of these formats, we can add elements in the thumbnail image that increase click-through rate. Here are the 9 click-through rate increasing elements that I love. The first one are logos. I mean, when I see this image, when I see some of these logos, I'm just more likely to click. And I know I'm not alone. But an even bigger one, I would say, are using arrows or circles like in these images. You can't always use them, but if you see an opportunity, definitely add them in your thumbnail. And of course, A/B test them. Which brings me to the review element. As you can see here, the Trustpilot score, a 1-star, a 5-star you see mostly, but also a 2-star score can perform well. By the way, I have many of these elements, like the review, like this Trustpilot score one, but also quotes, logos, and many others in this free thumbnail pack. So you can create this, and this in minutes for free in Photopea or of course in Photoshop. And another one, which is status increasing products or objects. For example, a Lamborghini if you have one, designer clothes, trophies, for example, the YouTube play button, anything that you think increases your status. On the same note though, remove any decreasing status objects in your room, if you're outside, the clothes you wear. And I mean, this can even be the view in your background, for example, that you see here. So maybe you even go outside and record a part of your, especially your intro, in front of a nice building, because then you can maybe use that as the shot in your thumbnail. Or of course, you can even rent a nice Airbnb. If you don't want to go outside, spend money, whatever it is, then you can use celebrities in your thumbnail. I've done this a lot and it works exceptionally well. But there's a caveat. When you use celebrities, people may come for them, not so much for you. So it decreases subscribe ratio. But that's something for later. Which brings me to blurred objects or pixelating objects. This can make a normal thumbnail increase much more curiosity in the viewer. Even if the object in itself, if they see it, once they see it, is not so special, it can work really well. And then we have emojis, which can also be icons and icon pack from these websites, and of course text. But try to keep your text short. 1 to max 5 words is what I prefer. And not only me, as you can see. Again, if you want this full page document, then comment the word guide below. But an arguably even more important thing to do in your thumbnail is to create an open loop. Here are 8 ways to open a loop. The first one is to blur or pixelate the main object. In this example, the guy that she actually likes. Another way to open a loop is to show the start, but to hide the end. which is basically a drastic before but no after. For example, only showing the first day in your gym journey. Another one, which Mr. Beast is doing a lot within his videos too, but you can also apply in your thumbnail, which is to show a countdown or somewhat of a progress bar. Now, Mr. Beast has done this, of course, using text like day 1 or number 3. However, this one is more difficult to implement, which is a clickbait object. Of course, it depends on the content you create, but most people can't really apply this one. But you can, for example, think of if Marcus Brownlee, the tech YouTuber, if he includes a crazy looking phone, which may not be released yet, or may not even never will be released, but it's created by AI. For example, a crazy version of the iPhone 17. Think outside of the box and you may be able to use this open loop method. Which brings me to the visual cliffhanger, where Mr. Beast is showing the perfect example here. However, this one is more easy, I think, which is to cut a sentence in the middle of it. For example, in this case, it is the more you don't have sex, the less, and then using the ... So try to find ways to use the ... Which brings me to a very simple one, which is the context-free screenshot. Simply a still image of yourself or something happening within the video. This can work exceptionally well because nowadays everyone is creating these fancy thumbnails, which makes you stand out if your thumbnail is very simple, not edited, no text, no editing, but you need to nail down the title for this one. But I must say that's often easier to do. While this one is more advanced, which is the wrong reaction loop, where you basically give the wrong impression, the wrong reaction. For example, laughing at a funeral, or in this case, smiling while a disaster is happening. Just expect to maybe get some comments, and definitely people coming to your video because they're looking for some laughs, for some humor. Again, if you want the full PDF, then you know what to do. Which brings me to the 2 thumbnail principles that you will find in the highest click-through rate thumbnails. The first one is the visual hierarchy rule, where the core question is, what is the first thing that viewers should see? And how do I make that the dominant frame? Let me show you through 3 examples. Here you see one big object, then a number, the time, and then the face, the person behind the video. In this one, you also see high contrast between the foreground and the background, where you have the sci-fi hand light stuff, then you have text, and you have the guy, the face, the person. And in this example, they use size, color, and negative space to guide your eyes. Now, why does this work? Well, because most thumbnails fail because everything shouts. However, if you apply this rule, then this ensures that one thing leads and the rest gets noticed later. It's just easier to understand right away. Fast, which is important, if we're all scrolling on this thing. Which brings me to the 1 emotion rule, where the core question is, which single emotion will drive, likely, the strongest desire to click? And is that emotion immediately feelable, visible? Now, why does this work? Well, because emotion is the fastest click trigger. I mean, just look at yourself, right? You click a video most often because of the emotion, not because you start thinking. So ask yourself with the thumbnail, what emotion do you want to convey? What is the best one? Is it fear? Is it excitement? Often it's not excitement or positive emotions. Is it sadness? Is it anger? And then make that extremely dominant. Use color psychology. Use the facial expressions, the right ones, and on and on. Now, before we move to a big one, also ask, how can you create conflict within the thumbnail? I say, how can you create conflict? Sometimes it's already there in this podcast, but sometimes it's not. And the highest converting thumbnails for me, for example, in this video, it had conflict within the thumbnail. It truly is a thumbnail cheat code. Even if the video or conversation, if you have a podcast, doesn't have conflict. I mean, if you don't have conflict with the speaker or your guest, or the video doesn't have it, it doesn't matter, because you can still make the thumbnail, a boring one, into one that has conflict, like I did here. Which brings me to this, because when I did this for my video, I went from a 5% click-through rate in the first hours to over 20% click-through rates after I changed the thumbnail. And it's called clickbait. Clickbait and clickbait. What is the worst case? Well, you have a bad like to dislike ratio. You say sorry and you have some reputation damage. What is the best case? Well, you get over 1 million views and people that still like your video, which is what happened for me. So let me tell you this, clickbait isn't the problem. Disappointing people is. So make sure the video is always worth watching, that it leaves people with a positive feeling, even if it's clickbait. And your like to dislike ratio will likely be okay. At least it has been my experience. Now, how do you actually implement clickbait in your thumbnails? Well, one of the best ways is to just open up some channels who use clickbait a lot, like these channels on screen, and look how they do it. Which brings me to a very interesting method. Listen closely. Simply test your thumbnails in your community tab before you upload your video. You create an image poll in your community tab, and then you add your thumbnails, and you wait at least 24 hours for the votes. This way you're more likely to start your video with your best thumbnail, which has been decided by your actual audience or part of your audience, which can be the difference between going viral or 500 views. Now, if you really want to go advanced or a different route, you can also make a Kahoot quiz and send it to people, maybe in your newsletter or somewhere else, even Instagram, or just friends to get their opinion on your thumbnails. Which brings me to a very important one. You may think it's simple, but it's to simply create or ask more variants. Because if I can tell you one thing, it is to create more variants. And if you have a thumbnail designer, to ask more variants. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been flabbergasted by the weirdest thumbnail that won in my A/B test. It's insane, literally. Today, I sometimes create 60 thumbnail variants for just one video. Now, I know that is extreme, but I usually have like around 20 variants for each video, but you get my point. Again, you can use my free thumbnail templates to create more variants, or a tool like Pixels, but don't use YouTube's free A/B test tool to test your variants, because they only show watch time share percentage. So what could happen? Well, you could be choosing the thumbnail that has a 4% click-through rate as the winner, because it had a 51% watch time share percentage, and thus you delete the thumbnail with a 10% click-through rate, because it only showed a 49% watch time share percentage. So ditch the YouTube's free tool, or only start using it once they actually start showing you click-through rate within it. But I doubt that will ever happen. Either use a pay tool like me, or track the click-through rates manually in your YouTube Studio, or use Google Sheets whenever you change the thumbnail. Now, you probably won't do that, which is fine. Which brings me to this little button. You want to look at traffic source, and then you finally see that a click-through rate of 1% within your first day is not bad, because most of that comes from suggested clicks, which is this little sidebar. And it gets much lower click-through rates, as you probably know. If you didn't know, suggested videos usually, for me at least, have a 1 to 4% click-through rate, where browse features usually is double, between 5 to 9%. So what I'm trying to say is, don't change your thumbnail or title if you see a low click-through rate. Instead, first look at your browse features click-through rate, this one. And then I change my thumbnail if it's below a 5%. Which brings me to making sure that your thumbnail is designed and optimized for mobile, but more importantly, for a suggested. Yes, you don't want to make sure that your thumbnails are only optimized for mobile, but for the suggested sidebar too. How? Well, by maximizing the space, showing your face as large as possible. The same with text, the same with other important elements. If they're not important, maybe delete them from the thumb, because people actually see it like this a lot of the times. So your details don't matter, but the things that should be readable or visible should be big. So forget the details that maybe 90% of the people can't see. This also means you want to ignore all the small, unimportant details. What I'm trying to say is, don't waste time perfecting the small details, because people see this, not this. And remember the visual hierarchy rule? Usually you want to show no more than 3 elements in the thumbnail. Brings me to number 13. Avoid the dead corner, which is the corner where YouTube shows the video duration. Don't show any important parts of your thumbnail there. But a more important one is to first test big changes in your thumbnail than small ones. Again, I'm still a big fan of A/B testing all of my thumbnails. I just don't use YouTube's free tool. Whatever you do, first test the big changes like this, and then you want to start moving and changing the small details. And keep in mind that people read from left to right in most countries. Therefore, you usually put the face on the right side and the text on the left. Even if you see big YouTubers do it differently, they can likely increase their click-through rates if they do it this way. Now, why is this the case? Again, because people read from left to right. Therefore, the message leads and the face supports it, so that the brain doesn't need to work to figure out what is going on. And I've personally tested this. It's the exact layout that gave my highest click-through rates in my thumbnail. There's one caveat though. If you use a famous person within your thumbnail, you may want to show the face first. It's a slight side note. Again, just test it for yourself. Which brings me to something I wish I knew sooner. I mean, I had an Adobe subscription. I still have for many years. I don't know how many. And if you do have that too, then you have access to free fonts. Yes, I had the Adobe subscription more than 10 years now before I realized this. They have a full stock library, free access Adobe fonts thing where you can download all of their font packs, like really good fonts. A lot of them are paid and I actually wanted to use them before, but I skipped them because they costed money and I don't want to run into trouble. But this is such a great place to get your fonts if you already have an Adobe subscription. Which brings me to this free Chrome extension.
Because there's something completely
to quickly download someone else's thumbnail and create a mood board or send it to, for example, a tool like Pixels. You can find it here. It's called YouTube Thumbnail Preview and I use it almost every day. I mean, it's a game changer. Or just use this string at the end of your thumbnails or the following one in your thumbnails which aren't full HD, like so, because that's what simply the free tool is doing. But hey, I prefer the thumbnail tool. I will leave a link to all the free tools that I use in the description. Which brings me to another thing that I wish I knew sooner, which is on Mac, you have this rename function, right? Very simple. But when you select all of the files, you can rename them in a batch, right? Batch rename 100 of files. As I mentioned before, I create sometimes 60 thumbnail variants and I was renaming them manually before. Sounds stupid, I know, but hey, if you don't know, then here you go. And this is how you can do that for free in Windows using a tool called Microsoft Power Toys. They have a lot of good stuff within that tool. And again, it is free. It's in my free Google Sheet with over 85 other free tools. But what if you finally get monetized, you get YouTube payments like me, but then YouTube terminates your channel? Well, that happened to me. It's actually one of the worst days in my life when I was younger. And I learned 10 things what you should never do on YouTube. Watch it over here. It's honestly one of my best videos. Talk soon. See you there. Or not. Ciao.